actually then leads on to um, the next topic, which was the constructivist school of sociology. I mean, it's perhaps not worth much attention, but during the time that you had the sort of interpretive turn, as it was called in anthropology, the writing culture time, in sociology, you had a number of books and people who talked about constructivism, which is the same thing, that basically sociology, which had prided itself on being quite an empirical science after Durkheim, that you went out and you found laws and so on and so on. These sociologists said it was Berger, people like Peter Berger and Luckman and so on, wrote books saying we actually construct the sociological facts from the way we interpret the world. The questions we ask actually create results. So that was a force in sociology, just as the other was in anthropology at the same time. So that was another undermining of certainty. And then the next thing I had was actually Ernest's concept of society. And I had that because, in a way, it's something I don't understand. You can perhaps explain. A big moment in my time at the London School of Economics, about which I'm writing at the moment, was in 1967, when Ernest Gellner was teaching at the LSE, and I went to seminars at which he was present, and I went to some talks he gave and so on. And either through that or some other reason, someone said, have you read Ernest's essay, Concepts and Society? And I remember sort of chasing it down the LSE library and reading it. And it was a revelation, because what he did, and it can be explained by one of the diagrams he drew, he said, you know, we are in the middle here, in the central part of this ring. Round us, there are concepts of, you know, space and time and truth and logic and everything. And then there's the world outside. And the world of reality, the actual tree, which exists out there, doesn't exist. We can't just see the tree. The tree comes in through this ring of concepts, and it filters. Now, this later I found echoed when I looked at the psychology of thinking in relation to glass. You know, I learned that we don't see the world. For example, artists don't see the world. Our eyes actually see reality the other way up. It's our brains that turn it the right way up. So that tree is actually, in what I see, is actually the other way up, and then comes through my brain, and then I see it the right way up. And this is why people like Gombrich and others say that children are often the best artists, because they haven't learned all the corruptions of how to reorganize reality. So they actually see it much more clearly than adults. And that's worth knowing. So basically, our growing up is a deformation or a corruption of reality, which is exactly the same messages as Wordsworth in The Prelude, that children see infancy around them and they see the world truly, and then society corrupts us and the shades of the prison house close in on us and so on. Now, Ernest had this view. So to me, he is the ultimate relativist, because we don't, you know, it's our minds that are shaping. It's exactly like Wittgenstein's bottle, except he's replacing the bottle by a line here, and he's allowing things in, but they get transformed. And so there is no, and it's again fits exactly with Hume, that basically
it does. It's very Humean, and it's very Kantian. I mean, he puts Hume and Kant together. I know that usually it's, you know, Kant, Hume that supposedly wakes Kant from his dogmatic slumbers or whatever. But he sees them as basically with different emphases, but they're basically the same. And you're absolutely right. And I think this is one of the big paradoxes about Gellner, really, but that he is Kantian, Humean, which is very subjective in a sense. But he says somewhere that he's, and in a sense, he kind of concedes that when he says that he's pro the Enlightenment and science and truth and all these things for Hegelian reasons. It's so he acknowledges that it's through Kant, Hume, and history that we've ended up. So it's purely accidental. It's purely subjective. But for him, this is why he thinks he can't be enchanted anymore. He says we're disenchanted for subjective historical reasons. So in a sense, it's his acknowledgement of enchantment that leads him to be disenchanted or to defend disenchantment in the way that he does, and in the Weberian way. It's a very odd thing. And actually, I mean, he says this, doesn't he, about a lot, Mill and a lot of the utilitarians. He said that, and when he looks at Bishop Berkeley and he looks at all these guys, and he says, actually, if you take them, if you logically work your way through these things, or even Hume, you end up in a very enchanted world, buzzing confusion and all this kind of stuff. What he finds interesting is that they didn't become kind of hippies. They didn't start taking and experimenting with taking LSD and trying to refine their sensibilities and stuff like that. They were very kind of dour in a way, and very ethical, and so that was the thing that he found interesting about Kant, I think, and in a sense Hume, that because they were subjective, there was an avenue that would have led to deep enchantments, and the kind of, like you say, the hippie kind of 60s would have been very Kantian and Human if you wanted to be, but they didn't. But you didn't end up with Victorian hippies. You ended up with kind of utilitarianism and these rather interesting, morally dour kind of characters, really. And that was the thing. I think that was the thing that Gellner was trying to work out, how that had happened.
Well, just that last thing reminded me of Puritanism, really. They were very dour and ascetic and Puritan. But there's an odd thing in Puritanism, which is that it has a double streak, which is you get the sort of rational Puritan dour side to it, but it also has the hippie side to it, because you get some Puritan sects then go into kind of almost end time stuff, shaking and quivering. I mean, the sort of extreme version, which I saw in a lovely reversion of Cold Comfort Farm, is Stella Gibbons' portrayal of the quivering brethren. Now, these are extreme Puritan sect who have decided they'll take one part of Puritanism to its extreme, which is the end of the world and doom and so on. So they're just waiting and they're all quivering.
Yeah, the Shakers, weren't they? There's a whole lot of that. And that's something that always intrigues me about the disenchanted people, because there is this doubleness, isn't it? There is this, it was like with the punks. The punks were supposedly the opposite of hippies, but they all were playing music and singing and not wanting to work. I mean, they said, it was partly because they couldn't get any work because they were unemployed, but there is this enchantment within the disenchantment all the time. This doubleness comes
all the time. This is what we're learning all the time.
Yeah.
But none of these things is pure. They're all yin yang. They all have a part of the other
absolutely
within them. But coming back to your thing about Hegel, I can't see that Ernest's rebuttal of this by saying he's a Hegelian is actually any kind of logical answer to this, because Hegel's idea, I imagine he might have been, is the spirit of history, which basically we can't argue with. And so he's saying, I believe they may be right, but I have to be different because the spirit of history has brought me to. Or he may be saying that they may be right, but by chance and so on, we have created another kind of
Yeah.
better technological world of the kind we were talking about earlier. It isn't a reply to the disenchantment, I mean, the enchanted view. It's basically saying, well, I don't, I have to live as I have to live. So it's sort of perhaps closer to what I was saying about willing suspension of disbelief. In other words, he can accept all this stuff in previous philosophy as highly relativist and so on. But when he lives his life back here now, when he's not there, he has to believe and act in different ways. Otherwise, everything would fall to pieces. So it's not that that was wrong, and this is how most, I suppose, anthropologists deal with cultural relativism. As I've said before, we can see why people believe in witchcraft or bind other women's feet or do these things. But when it comes down to it, I believe this is right and this is wrong. In other words, there's no, as Hume would say, there's no justification for my belief. But my life would fall apart if I started to think, suspend all disbelief all the time in all my life, because then I would question everything, and then there would be no morality.